Hi, welcome back to my lectures. Today we are going to talk about the plant life cycle. So plant, like any other living organism, have their specific developmental history. Especially plant exhibit a so-called haplodiploidic life cycle wherein the gametes, which is the sex cells, are not direct product of meiosis. Instead, the diploid sporophyte cell go through meiosis and produce the haploid spore. Each spore then mitotically divided in order to produce the haploid gametophyte, which then yield the gametes. The gametes then undergo fertilizations in order to produce zygote. Throughout their life cycle, all plants undergo the alternations of generations. This cycle of generations include both diploid, which is 2N phase, and haploid, which is the N phase. So what is the alternations of generations? Alternations of generations is common in plant, algae, and fungi. This can be compared to the sexual reproduction in animals, where both haploid and diploid cells are found in every generation. Plants alternate between diploid sporophytes and haploid gametophyte. So this is a diploid and this is the haploid. And also between asexual and sexual reproductions. Therefore, the life cycle of plant is known an alternation of generations. The ability of the plant to produce sexually and asexually help them to adapt to different environments. The alternations of generations depend upon the type of the plants. In bryophytes, the dominant generations is haploid and the gametophyte comprise the main part. In tracheophytes, which I will explain later on, the dominant generations is diploid and the sporophyte comprise the main plant. So the plant life cycle in one of the two generations is dominant over the others. The plant in the dominant generations grow larger and live longer. The plant in the non-dominant generations are small and hardly visible. On the contrary, the dominant generations are seen in form of fern, trees of other plants. The dominant generations in vascular plant is the Sporophytes, while in the non-vascular plant is the gametophyte. So look at this picture here. Is showing the two stages of alternations of generations. So for the sporophyte generations, you can see that the two haploid gametes fuse together to form a diploid zygote. This results in a sporophyte. The sporophyte is formed by multiple rounds of mitosis and is a multicellular organism. On reaching maturity, the sporophyte develop to reproduce organ known as sporangia. This represent one key point in the alternations of generations. These sporangia are used to create haploid spore. These spores are released and carried away by air and water, and when the conditions are favorable, they develop into a gametophyte. So in the next generations of a gametophyte, the spore is newly formed and has half the DNA as the parent organism. This spore undergo mitosis multiple times to form a gametophyte. The gametophyte generation create gametes. These gametes are produced by gametangia. These gametes are then transferred between plant or spread into the environment. When a gamete encounters a gamete of the opposite side, which means male and female, it's fused with it to form a zygote, which eventually become a sporophyte. This is the simplest versions of alterations of generations. So this table shows the differences of sporophyte and gametophyte, in which type of cell reproductions in sporophyte is asexual reproductions, while gametophyte is sexual reproductions. And the cell divisions occur in sporophyte stages is via meiosis, and in the gametophyte is via mitosis. The offspring that produce is spore for sporophyte, while in gametophyte stages they produce two types of the gametes, either sperm or egg. So from there, the number of chromosome also is haploid for gametes and diploid for spore. So first cell produced from sporophyte is diploid zygote, and it is the haploid spore that produced by gametophyte.
They categorize into kingdom Plantae. So the general characteristic of plant is there are eukaryotic and multicellular cell. The cell have a cellulostic wall. Majority have transport system, and they have the photosynthesis activities. They can reproduce by asexual or sexual, and lastly, they show alternations of generation. So if we can see the characteristic from here, the example of fungus, the mushroom is not characterized in the kingdom of Plantae, but instead, the algae are characterized. So there are types of the three divisions of the plant kingdom. There are Bryophyta, Peridophyta, and Spermophyta. So the vascular, non-vascular phylum is including the green algae, red algae, and brown algae, while for the Bryophyta is including, for example, mosses. Hepatophyta is liverwort. Enterocerophyta is the hornwort. So let's see the non-vascular life cycle. At this point, we use the Bryophytes as an example. So they may depend on the plant started with mosses. The typical non-vascular plant, but such as simple plant that are very interesting life cycle. Whereas most kind of plant have two set of chromosome in the vegetative cell, mosses have only a single set of the chromosome. So that raises the questions: how does the meiosis occur? So in mosses, the sporophyte phase generally depend on the gametophyte for its nutrient. Mosses produce two different types of spore, and this distinctively develop into male and female gametophyte. Because of this, mosses are considered to be heterosporous. So based on the diagram that you see here, cell in the sporangium, which is the chorophyte, will divide through meiosis in order to produce spore. So they can produce either male or females. After that, each kind of spore respectively divided through mitosis to produce male and female gametophytes. At maturations, the gametophyte then differentiate into enteridia, which is for the male part, and archegonia for female. In this place, mitosis occur following the productions of the sperm and egg. After the sperm and egg meet, the sporophyte generations grow in the archegonium and is attached to gametophyte. So therefore, in order for fertilizations to occur, sperm must swim in a drop of water from an enteridium to an egg in an archegonium. If fertilization takes place, it results in a zygote that develops into tiny sporophytes on the parent gametophyte plant. So the sporophyte produce haploid spore, and this develop into the next generations of gametophyte plant. Then the cycle will repeat. So here, the idea is the spore need to use the wind or the water for the dispersal. So this picture show the male and female reproductive structures on the mosses, and here is the structures of the sporophyte and the gametophytes. So vascular plant, also known as Trachyophytes, form a large group of plants that are defined as land plants that have lignified structures. So that is also known as the xylem for conducting water and mineral throughout the plants. They also have a specialized non-lignified structures called phylum to conduct products of photosynthesis. Vascular plant include club mosses, wholesale trails, fern, gymnosperm and angiosperm. So let's Fern and fern alike are members of a group plants called the Peridophytes. Basically, fern and fern alike and mosses undergo almost similar developmental pattern. However, one major difference between the two is that most ferns are considered to be homosporous, meaning only one type of spore called sporangium is produced by the sporophyte, and only one gametophyte is needed to develop the male and female sex organ. Another major difference between them is that both generations in the life cycle of fern are autotrophic. So look at this. So look on this diagram. The sporophyte generations is the more dominant phase, which show in light green color here, and is independence of the gametophyte generations. So basically, the sporangia are covered inside structures called sorus, or in plural we call it as a sori. The spore are then produced when the sporangia undergo meiosis. After that, each spore mitotically divided in order to produce the gametophyte that matured into ankyridia for female and ancogonia for female. The gametophytes generations is smaller than the sporophytes, but is equally important because it is where fertilization takes place. Usually, when the water is present, the sperm in the ankyridia swim to the egg in the So this is the picture showing stem sporophytes growing from the gametophyte, and this is a more example of the fern structures, and this is the mature sporophyte, and this is what I say the structures of the sorus and the sori. So the next vascular species that we are going to explain is the seed flowering plants. So the seed flowering plants contain divided into two. That is a naked seed, which are in the divisions of gymnosperm, and another is the cover seed, which is the angiosperm. The general characteristic of the seed plant is the plant has root, stem, leaf, and seed bearing structures. Of course, they produce seed and they have chlorophyll, hence they can work on photosynthesis. And they also have vascular tissue that highly developed with xylem tissue consisting of both xylem and phylum. So this seed plant is further divided into two subgroups, that is gymnosperm and angiosperm. The gymnosperm have the characteristics such as they bear cones of two types, female and male. After fertilization, seeds are not enclosed into the fruit wall. That is why we call it as naked seed. They show some xerophytic characteristics such as a roll leaf, needle-shaped leaf, sunken stomata, and thick waxy leaf. So xylem also consists mainly trachea, while phylum does not have companion cells. So let's look at the life cycle of a conifer. In these chapters, we use the pine tree as an example. So the pine tree carry both male and female sporophyte on the same matured sporophyte. Therefore, they are also called as monoecious plant. Like all gymnosperm, pine tree are heterosporous. It means that it's generating two different types of spore, which is male microspore and female megaspores. In male corn, the microsporocyte give rise to pollen grain by meiosis. In the spring, large amounts of yellow pollen are released and carried by the wind. Some gametophytes will land on a female corn, and pollination is defined as the initiation of pollen tube growth. The pollen tube develops slowly as the generative cell in the pollen grain divide into two haploid stem cells by mitosis. At fertilizations, one of the sperm cell will finally unite its haploid nucleus with the haploid nucleus of an egg cell. let's see how female organelle development. So while in the female cones, which also known as the ovulate cone, will contain 2 ovules per scale. One megaspore mother cell, which also called as megaporocyte, will undergo meiosis in each ovule. So it will produce 3 of the 4 cells. It will produce 4 cells, and 3 of the cells will break down, leaving only 1 single surviving cell, which will develop into a female multicellular gametophyte. So this cell is anchored in ankygonia, which is known as the archegonium reproductive organ that contain the single large egg. Upon fertilizations, the diploid egg will give rise to embryo, which is encoded in a seed cord of tissue from the parent plant. Fertilizations and seed development is a long process in pine tree. It may take up to 2 years after pollination. The seed that is formed contains 3 generations of tissue, which is the seed cord that originates from the sporophyte tissue, the gametophyte that will provide nutrient, and the embryo itself. In the life cycle of a conifer, the sporophyte, which is a 2N phase diploid, is the longest phase. The gametophyte in haploid, microspores and megaspore are reduced in size. This phase may take more than 1 year between pollination and fertilization, while the pollen tube grows towards the megatophyte diploid, which undergo mitosis into megaspore. And then the megaspore will mature into the egg. So now we continue with angiosperm. Angiosperm always has the flower structures. So the seed is contained inside the fruits. So flower contain the plant reproductive structure. This reproductive structure is the fruits. The typical flower has 4 main parts of whorls, known as the calyx, corolla, angiosperm, and gynoecium. So the outermost walls of the flower has green leafy structures that known as sepal. The sepal, collectively called the calyx, help to protect the unopened bud. The second walls is comprised of petals, usually brightly colored, collectively called the corolla. The numbers of sepal and petal varies depends on whether the plant is monocot or dicot. In monocot, petals usually number 3 or multiple of 3. In dicot, the number of petals is 4 or 5, or multiple of 4 and 5. So together, the calyx and corolla are known as pyria. The third walls contain the male reproductive structures and known as the angiosperm. The angiosperm has stamen with anthers that contain the microsporangia. The innermost group of structure in the flower is gynoecium, or the female reproductive component. The scapula is the individual unit of the gynoecium and has a stigma, style, and ovary. A flower may have 1 or multiple scapula. So if all 4 walls, the calyx, corolla, angiosperm, and gynoecium are present, then the flower is described as the complete flower. So if any of the 4 parts is missing, the flower is known as incomplete. Flower that contain both an endosperm and gynoecium, we call it as perfect flower. There are 2 types of incomplete flower. Stamen flower contain only an endosperm, and scapulate flower have only the gynoecium. Because the double fertilization and pollination is a complex mechanism, we will discuss of it on the next chapters. So this is the life cycle of angiosperm. So basically, the angiosperm or all flowering plant may look like they have a diplotic life cycle because the gametophyte state is just exhibited by very few cells. However, this is not true because meiosis still follow meiosis during the sporocyte phase, creating a gametophyte that can produce either the sperm or the egg. So this event takes place inside the organ that distinguishes angiosperm from other part of the plant. So we will also look into each step of life cycle angiosperm at the next chapter. So thanks for watching. So I see you guys back in the next chapter.